Hello, I'm Tania Israel, and I am here to share with you a little bit of optimism for 2024. I've been doing this work on navigating political polarization for a number of years now, and I started out somewhat optimistic. I created something that I call the flow chart that will resolve all political conflict in our country. So that gives you a sense of how optimistic a person I tend to be. But the remarkable thing is that as I've continued doing this work, I created a workshop that I've done with a lot of people. I wrote a book about dialogue across political lines. And the more I do this work, the more encouraged I am. And I recognize that not everybody's in the same boat. Not everybody's feeling that. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what's making me optimistic, especially as we start out 2024, which, there's a lot going on this year that's on people's radar. So let me talk about some of the things that help me to be hopeful in these times. I want to start out just by sharing a little bit of information, which is that as we're thinking about these politically fraught times or political conflict, there's two different types of political polarization. So, one type is ideological polarization, and that has to do with how far apart we are on our views of the issues. And the other type of political polarization is what we call affective polarization. So, affective polarization has to do with our feelings toward people who disagree with us about these issues. So, the animosity that we might be feeling toward them. So, in terms of ideological polarization, let's start there. The thing that I find really encouraging is that we're not as far apart as we think we are. There are decades of data from numerous different studies that demonstrate this. But I'm going to show you here, just as an example, data from the American National Election Study. This is over 30,000 people across 3 decades of research. And they asked Democrats and Republicans, how do you feel about these issues? And then they asked, what do you think Democrats and Republicans think about these issues? And so what we see here is that the actual views on the positions, the averages, are these bars, and how people perceive where people perceive Democrats to be, that's the blue dot, where people perceive Republicans to be, that's the red dot. On every issue across 30 years, so whether it has to do with how we deal with people who are accused of crimes, busing, defense, health, jobs, minorities, all kinds of different things, in every single case, the actual positions are closer together than what we perceive them to be. In fact, what we perceive the distance to be is twice that of what the actual distance between Democrats and Republicans' views are. So we're not as far apart as we think. And the reason that we think we're farther apart, there's a couple of reasons. One is that you might notice that in the media, they are showing us people who are more at the extremes and also who are pretty worked up about stuff. And most people are not at the extremes, and most people aren't as worked up about the issues. We also, if we look at social media, the people who are most likely to post on social media about politics are people who are more extreme on the issues. And the other thing is our own minds tend to distort reality so that we see people as being more extreme than they actually are. So, for all of these reasons, we have these ideas about how far apart the two different sides are, and we're wrong about that we're not as far apart as we think we are. So, I find that really encouraging. What about affective polarization? I mean, you've got to see this. People are really hostile toward people who are in a different political party or on a different side of a political issue. And we see this in things like, people saying, I don't want to work with or live near or have a member of my family marry somebody who's in a different political party. So the animosity is real, and it's actually been ramping up considerably over the years. So I tend to think that the biggest problem is not that we have ideological differences. The biggest problem is the tremendous animosity that we're feeling toward people on the other side. We see them as irrational, uninformed, hateful, all of these things. The good news is we can actually reduce affective polarization. So how do we do that? I've already told you that the news is showing us these really extreme perspectives. we can limit our news intake. The news is also showing us things that are really emotionally activating because that's what keeps you turned in and clicking on things. So don't have it on in the background all the time. Tune in occasionally so that you can stay informed. It's important to be informed, but sometimes people are having it news on as the default and just tuning out occasionally. Think about it instead as, think about what you want to know about, how you're going to find that out, go get that information, and then go back to your life and go do other things. Same thing about social media. We want to particularly avoid the emotionally activating social media and that kind of engagement with it. So when we see something that just immediately like gets our blood flowing, don't click on share. Don't immediately repost that elsewhere. That's just contributing to how amped up people are feeling and how stressed and distressed we are. And third, correct those misperceptions. I just shared with you some accurate information. There's more accurate information out there, and we can find out more about where people are coming from on different sides of an issue. Something that will help with all of these things is looking at a site like allsides.com. They are providing news that comes from different sides of an issue so that we can understand how people in a different, who have a different position are being informed about things. So we're not as far apart as we think we are, and we can reduce affective polarization. That's good news. Also, 2024 is an election year, and I know that that is stressing a lot of people out. But the thing I love about an election year is it gives us so many opportunities to support democracy. Obviously, we can vote. That's a really important thing. But not everybody votes. A lot of people don't. So not only do we need to vote, but we can also encourage other people to vote. So you can talk to voters. You can volunteer for a political campaign or for an issue or for an organizing group, and you can get out there. You can register to people to vote. You can talk to voters, make sure that they know that an election's coming up. Let them know how you feel about the issues. Make a connection with them. People often don't vote because nobody's asked them to vote, or because they don't feel well informed enough about the issues, or because they're having logistical barriers that we might be able to help them with. So talking to voters is helpful. If you don't want to do any of those things, maybe on election day, go work at the polls. That you can, we need people participating in our democracy in so many different ways to make it work. And so volunteering at the polls is a great way to do it. And I did it once, and it turns out it's not even volunteering. They'll even pay you a little bit. So any of these things are great ways to participate in democracy and make sure that we're helping to strengthen it. Another thing that makes me really optimistic is that there's this thing called the bridging movement. There are literally hundreds of organizations, more than 500, who are working on helping to bridge political divides and helping to strengthen our democracy. And they're doing work in our communities. Some are doing work at the national level. They're doing work with elected officials, doing work with community members, in congregations, in all kinds of different settings to try to help to strengthen the connections that we have with each other. Because the more divided we are, the more vulnerable we are to both internal and external anti-democratic influences. So we have lots of opportunities to participate, and there are people who are working on that. Just knowing that makes me so optimistic. Also, I get to go to a monthly meeting with all these people, and they're wonderful, lovely people who are doing things. And every single one of these organizations has people engaging. There's something called the National Week of Conversation coming up, and you can participate in that. Just any of these things to participate in. But even if you don't want to participate in any of the bridging movement, know that it's there, and know that there are people who are really working hard on supporting our democracy and helping to bring us together. So those are some of the things that make me optimistic. We're not as far apart as we think we are. We can reduce affective polarization. The election year offers us lots of opportunities to support democracy. And there's a bridging movement out there that we're not hearing about in the media, but that's really vibrant and strong. So all of those things are great. The other thing, I just have to put in a little plug here that makes me optimistic, is that I have a new book coming out in 2024 about surviving and thriving in politically polarized times. All the research that I did for this book made me even more optimistic. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview so that you know, like, what am I talking about in this book? How are we supposed to be doing better? Well, One area is to reduce polarizing input. And I talked about some of this. We can consume news wisely, we can use social media intentionally, and we can correct our distorted perceptions. We can also build our individual capacity to be able to deal with some of the challenges that political polarization offers. We can foster emotional resilience. We can broaden our minds. It's good to understand a perspective that you don't agree with, not to change your mind, but just to understand where other people are coming from. And we can open our hearts. And we might not initially feel like doing that, but hopefully, after we've turned down some of that polarizing input, we'll be in a place where we might be interested in that a little bit more. And if after all that you want to strengthen connections with other people, you can engage with people across the divide, and there are some effective ways of doing that. We can participate meaningfully in community and country, and all the ways to do that in an election year are really great. And then we can also join the bridging movement or at least follow it. If nothing else, go to the Listen First Project and sign up for their weekly emails. You do that by signing their Listen First pledge. And every week, I get an email that says, here's something that we're doing in the bridging movement. And it just makes me so happy to see people who are doing this and other people who are optimistic and informed and organizing. So I don't have a title for this book yet, but I will really soon. And so watch for this. But it's one of the things that's making me really happy is doing all of this research for the book. I can see how much power each one of us has to get through political polarization better and maybe even help to resolve it. There's a lot of resources that I put out there. You can read my book, Beyond Your Bubble. If you go to my website, you can download the flowchart that will resolve all political conflict in our country. I've got a couple of TEDx talks that you can see. I try to put a lot of resources out there on the website, but I also send out a monthly email so you can sign up for that newsletter, and you will get a little dose of me every month if that's something that you want. You can follow me on social media at Tania Israel PhD or Dr. Tania Israel, and I hope that all of that helps you to be more optimistic and helps you to get through 2024 in a way that feels like thriving and feels connected and feels good about our democracy. Thanks so much.